The Mideast is in its usual state of unrest, of uproar, what's happening in Lebanon, in Tunisia, in Sudan. Israel just went through one of its periodic political crises. And I'm reminded of the story that made the rounds a couple of years ago after the last elections in Israel, and in the period after Netanyahu had won but had not yet taken office, while Olmert was still the acting prime minister. And the story is that some guy comes up to the prime minister's residence in Jerusalem and knocks on the door, and Aliza Olmert, Olmert's wife, answers, and he says, good morning, hi, I'd like to see the prime minister, please. And she says, well, as you know, he's not really the prime minister anymore, and in any event, he's not home. He says, thank you very much, walks away. 15 minutes later, he comes back, knocks on the door, and she answers. He says, hi, I'd like to see the prime minister, please. She said, I told you, he's not really the prime minister anymore, and in any event, he's not home. All right, thank you, walks away. 15 minutes later, comes back, knocks on the door. Hi, I'd like to see the prime minister, please. He said, tell me, I told you, don't you understand? Are you stupid? Don't you get it? He's not the prime minister anymore. He said, yeah, I understand. It's just so good to hear it. And of course, the beauty of that one is you can change the names and the location. It's adaptable. But it's all downhill from here because I was asked to speak about Iran. And that's not a funny subject. And we speak of Iran in strong terms, almost apocalyptical. We speak of Iran as being a strategic threat to the United States, to its allies, and possibly being an existential threat to Israel. There's no stronger word in the English language than existential. It doesn't get stronger than that. But the Iranian threat is more than just, not to belittle, it's more than just the nuclear issue. It goes beyond that. It's the Iranian role in the region as a whole. Iran being today the primary player, or at least a primary player in Iraq. Iran being the backer of Hezbollah, which is its proxy in Lebanon. Hezbollah, which is in the process of becoming, in effect, the government of Lebanon, of establishing an Iranian mini-state right on Israel's border. A Hezbollah which today is thought to have approximately 45,000 rockets. 45,000. In 2006, at the time of the war, it was thought to be about 13,000. Hezbollah fired 4,000 of those rockets during the fighting in 2006. If we just maintain the ratio in the next round, and the next round, to my way of thinking, is a question of when, not if. Hezbollah's raison d'etre is its confrontation with Israel. So it's just a question of timing. If they maintain the same ratio in the next round, we could be talking about 15,000 rockets, and who says that it'll be the same ratio? It could be 30,000 as well. The next round will make the war in 2006 pale in comparison. And it's a Hezbollah which has been at the forefront of the efforts to stymie and block the peace process. And Iran, which is playing a role in Yemen, Sudan. And Iran, which is rapidly becoming a regional hegemon. And we see the Sunni states in the region in a state of concern, I would say almost panic, in some ways even more than Israel. Now, in their case, it's not an existential threat. But they are concerned about the influence, the power that Iran is gaining, and especially the power and influence that it would have if it gains nukes. And so in the last couple of years, we've seen over a dozen of the countries in the region, of the Sunni states, beginning to look at the possibility of nuclear programs of their own. And I'll come back to that afterwards, but the idea of a multi-nuclear Middle East is a nightmare scenario that I don't know how we deal with. We're talking about an Iran which is at the forefront at the battle for the heart of the Muslim world, between the modernizers who seek a different future for the Muslim and specifically the Arab world, a future in which there is room for socioeconomic reform and maybe some political liberalization, and the fundamentalists who have a totally different vision of the future. A vision which is shrouded in the darkness of fundamentalism, in poverty, in oppression, in lack of civil rights. We have a confrontation between the West, which really today is a status quo player in the Middle East. What does the West really want in the Middle East today? It wants peace and quiet, it wants stability, it wants the ability to continue buying oil at decent prices. But what do the fundamentalists want? Stability? Status quo? Not at all, just the opposite. It's all about redressing past wrongs, correcting historic injustices that the West has caused the Muslim world. And the last thing that they seek is stability and status quo. They want to change, to undermine, to overthrow the existing regional order, possibly even the international order, in order to restore Islam to its golden age, its past grandeur, its leadership role in the world. And the West blocks, limits its ability, the fundamentalist ability to achieve that goal. So they're all about instability, about changing the system, the existing system and international order. And this is a conflict which, beyond its strategic level, which I was just describing, is also a conflict on a normative level between the values that we enshrine of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Those are our ultimate values. Well, what are the values of the fundamentalists? Certainly, that's not it. There is no right to life, certainly not in this life, or liberty and happiness, not in this life, maybe in the next life, but not in this life. There's no right to life itself. That's why you can commit terrorism. And if it's suicide terrorism, even your own person, the perpetrator's life is not a source of value. That's why the Iranians back in the Iran-Iraq war could use human wave tactics, sending thousands and thousands of their own people to guaranteed death, or just about guaranteed clearing minefields, because there is no right to life. And there's certainly not a right to liberty and happiness. This life is about suffering, it's about sacrifice in the hope that maybe you'll get your compensation in the next life. Not now. And in the meantime, it's a battle for redressing past wrongs and for achieving your goals almost at all costs, even if they're extremist goals. It's not about conflict resolution, about meeting the other side halfway or almost halfway, which is the Western way of conflict resolution. It's about sticking to your goals, your ends, extremist as they may be, for as long as it takes. And if it takes a long time, that's okay. You have God, you have Allah on your side. So what we have here is a strategic confrontation, but a strategic confrontation which is embedded in a far deeper normative battle. And it's one which is very hard, if not difficult, to bridge. But let me turn to the nuclear program itself. You have a map here of the known sites. Now, the Iranians learned very well from the Iraqi experience. And so they've dispersed their program throughout the country, deeply embedded in hardened targets. And this, of course, is a map of the known sites. We don't know where unknown sites are, and there may be sites such as that. The Bushehr nuclear reactor, in itself, not a major proliferation danger. The primary danger in Bushehr is the fact that it has provided Iran with the know-how, with the technology for the military program. And here our good friend Ahmadinejad touring the Natanz enrichment facility, the primary enrichment facility, one of the primary components of the program, which was a secret facility until 2002, I believe it was, when it was uncovered. The Qom nuclear site, just outside the holy city of Qom, this is the site which was just disclosed by Iranian opposition a year or two ago. And of course, the question is whether there are additional sites that we don't know about. Let me tell you, though, I think Iran has very good reasons for wanting a nuclear capability. If I was an Iranian strategist, I would want it as well. You have to understand the other side if you want to cope with them. If you view the world from Iran, from Tehran, what you see is the United States surrounding Iran on virtually all sides, either literally on their border in Iraq and Afghanistan, US forces in other countries in the region on their border and beyond, but in the region, and American forces deployed in the Gulf. You see a United States which, under the Bush administration at least, toppled two Muslim regimes in the space of 2 years, and then talked about regime change in Iran as well. Now, the Obama administration doesn't seem to be talking, at least at this point, about regime change, but if you're an Iranian, you say, well, we can't be sure of that. That can change any time. The United States, from Iran's point of view, is the only potentially existential threat to the regime. And so they look at the US with great fear. It's their number one strategic concern. And that, I think, is the first reason that Iran wants a nuclear capability. The second reason is Iraq. Now, Iraq is out of the warfighting business for the foreseeable future. But Iran and Iraq fought a bloody 8-year-long war in the 1980s, a horrific war in terms of the human losses. Iran itself lost close to 500,000 people. We don't know the number of Iraqis, but it was large and ugly. 500,000 people. And the Iraqis fired chemical weapons, chemical missiles at Iran, including Tehran. Nobody in the world gave it down. Iran has a deep national trauma over that. And so again, Iraq is not a concern for the next few years, but in the long term, if you're doing national strategic planning, Iraq is probably still in the second place in terms of Iran's concerns. In the third place, they have Pakistan, a longtime Sunni rival for influence in the region. I think it would be fair to say that the Pakistani regime is less than totally stable and secure. And it's got nukes. And what happens if this regime comes apart completely and the nukes fall into the wrong hands? Or what happens if the regime still exists, but again, it falls into the wrong hands? So again, an Iranian motivation. Israel is probably only in fourth place in terms of Iran's strategic priorities. There's an interesting thing here. Both countries look at each other with deep fear, deep-seated fear. And the result is a classic escalatory cycle. Israel looks at Iran in fear, takes what it considers to be defensive measures. Only in Tehran, they look offensive. Iran takes defensive measures, but they look offensive in Israel. And we're caught in this cycle that it's very hard to get out of. And just by the way, I'm not assuming that everybody here is innocent, okay? I don't think Iran is. But it's very hard to get out of this cycle, even if no one has evil intentions. And Iran also finds itself a Shiite state in a Sunni ocean. Nukes give you prestige, they give you influence. It's become a rallying point for the regime domestically. Even if they wanted to give them up, it would be hard to do so politically at this point. But the bottom line is we have to understand, if we want to cope with the issue, with the problem, that Iran has very good reasons of its own for wanting a nuclear capability. Well, what does it mean for Israel? I think the debate in Israel is a narrow one, but a very, very significant one. There are really two primary schools of thought. One says that an Iranian nuclear capability is an absolutely existential threat to the state of Israel. And I chose to present this slide because it is, to me, personally, a very important and emotional one. Okay, Israel Air Force F-15s flying over Auschwitz-Birkenau. We're in a very different position from where we were some decades ago. But one school of thought views a nuclear Iran as being a modern-day Auschwitz. There's a second school of thought, and I personally place myself in this school, which says, yes, it is definitely a dire threat for Israel, but not necessarily existential. Now, just by the way, living with, not every threat has to be existential to be extreme. Dire threats are bad enough. But there is a fundamental difference in this narrow difference in terminology. If it's existential, then really the conclusion is you must do everything possible to prevent it from happening. If it's just, I stress, just dire, then maybe there are other options. Maybe you can live with it. And in the end, the difference between the two schools of thought boils down to a question: is Iran a rational actor or not? Now, what does rational mean? There's no doubt that Iran is an extremist country, okay, what we might colloquially call a bunch of Michiganders. But they're not really crazy. I don't think so. I don't think they're irrational. I think if you look at their behavior over the decades since the Islamic regime came to power, for the most part, they seem to weigh costs and benefits. And when they run up against walls, they don't necessarily change their objectives, but they look for other ways of going about achieving them. So they do seem to be able to weigh costs and benefits. The policies, the objectives are extreme. There's no doubt. But wanting to wipe your neighbor off the face of the earth, well, it's extreme. It's not friendly. It's unneighborly. That doesn't necessarily mean irrational. It doesn't mean you're crazy. If the Iranians are rational, then they should be deterrable. If they're not, we're in big trouble. Now, what does deterrable mean?